On Christmas Eve, a lonely father returns home believing he will face yet another cold and distant night with his daughter. But everything changes when he sees the girl joyfully communicating through sign language and being understood as she never was by him. The child's laughter, the caregiver's presence, and the warmth of that moment reveal a new possibility of affection and an invisible danger lurking nearby. Yet while the family quietly forms through silence and signs, the caregiver's past arrives at the door, ready to threaten everything they are building. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching us from. Let's continue. The cold December wind blew through the streets of Manchester with that typical insistence of the days leading up to Christmas. Henry Thompson parked his car in front of the townhouse where he lived, in the Didsbury neighborhood, and remained for a few seconds with his hands on the steering wheel, taking a deep breath. The dashboard clock read 6:20 p.m. Another day that ended too late, another night he would arrive home when Sophie would already be almost asleep. The facade illuminated by the neighbors' Christmas lights only made his own house darker, quieter, emptier. He knew what he would find inside, the same silence as always, the same distance that seemed to grow each day between him and Sophie, the same feeling that he was failing as a father. Henry was 38 years old and felt as if he carried the weight of a lifetime on his back. He was a man of medium height, brown hair beginning to show the first grey strands at his temples, tired eyes that no longer shone as before. He had worked as an architect for 15 years, and although he was good at what he did, lately he felt he was just going through the motions, drawing plans that no longer sparked any passion in him. Everything had lost its colour since Marianne left. It had been 3 years since Marianne left, 3 long and painful years since Henry's world had collapsed, and he had to learn to be both father and mother, a task for which he had never felt prepared. The girl was only 5 years old when it all happened, too small to fully understand what that permanent absence meant, too big to forget the mother who cradled her every night. Since then, Henry found himself lost in a labyrinth of guilt, longing, and inadequacy. He still remembered the day he met Marianne, at a graduation party for a mutual friend. She wore a blue dress and had that smile that lit up any room. They talked all night about architecture, music, dreams, and when the sun rose, Henry already knew he wanted to spend the rest of his life with that woman. They married 2 years later in a simple ceremony in the Japanese garden at Heaton Park, surrounded by friends and family. They were happy in a quiet and genuine way, building a life together brick by brick, dream by dream. Sophie was born with partial deafness, a condition Marianne had always known how to handle with naturalness and patience. She had learned British Sign Language, BSL, during her pregnancy, anticipating her daughter's needs with that maternal intuition that Henry admired and envied. When Marianne was still present, the house vibrated with life. There were laughs, silent conversations made of delicate gestures, music Sophie felt through vibrations, hugs that said everything without needing words. Marianne had transformed Sophie's limitation into something beautiful, into a different form of communication that made the family even more united. After she was gone, Henry tried to keep everything going. He hired nannies, followed established routines, ensured Sophie attended therapy and specialized school. But something fundamental had been lost. He had never learned BSL. He had always put it off, always believed there would be time, that Marianne would be there to translate the world between father and daughter. And now alone he felt like a foreigner in his own home, unable to reach the child he loved most in the world. Henry sighed once more and finally got out of the car. The night was especially cold, and he tightened his coat as he walked to the door. Before putting the key in the lock, he heard something that made him stop, his heart pounding without warning. It was a laugh. A sharp, crystalline, childlike laugh. Sophie's laugh. A sound he hadn't heard in so long that he had almost forgotten what it was like. He opened the door carefully, as if fearing that any sudden movement might break that fragile moment. The living room was transformed. Pine garlands hung from the walls, intertwined with red and gold ribbons. Golden fairy lights outlined the window, creating shimmering reflections on the wooden floor. And in the corner, next to the Christmas tree that Henry had half-heartedly set up days before, now completely decorated with colourful baubles, bows and ornaments he didn't even know they still had. Sophie was sitting on the plush rug, moving her hands joyfully, while a young woman, kneeling before her, responded with equally fluid and expressive gestures. Henry stood paralysed at the entrance. The scene before him was so unexpected, so alive, so full of an energy he hadn't seen in that house for so long, that he needed a few seconds to process what he was seeing. The nanny the agency had sent that morning must have been in her early 20s, brown hair tied in a practical ponytail, a delicate face with soft features. She was still wearing her impeccable uniform, a white blouse and black trousers, and had yellow cleaning gloves hanging from her forearm. But what was truly impressive was not her appearance, but the ease with which she communicated with Sophie. Their hands danced in the air, quick and precise, and the harmony between the two seemed ancient, as if they had known each other for years, as if they spoke a secret language that only they mastered. Sophie was the first to notice her father's presence. She turned with an illuminated face and waved enthusiastically, making a gesture Henry vaguely recognized as hello. He waved back, trying to smile, but felt a tight knot in his throat. The nanny quickly stood up, smoothing her clothes with a nervous movement, and offered a polite smile. "Good evening, Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice low and soft. "I'm Juliana. Juliana Nelson. The agency must have informed you I would be starting today." Henry nodded, still somewhat dazed. Yes, of course. Sorry, I didn't expect to find the house like this." "Sophie asked me to decorate," Juliana explained, with slight bashfulness. "She said her mother always decorated on the 23rd. I hope it wasn't inconvenient." "No, not at all," Henry replied, his voice hoarser than he intended. It's been a long time since I've seen the house like this." Sophie stood up and ran to her father, pulling him by the hand and pointing to the tree, to the garlands, to every detail of the decoration. She gestured quickly, animatedly, and Henry tried to follow but felt lost. He looked at Juliana with an expression of silent plea, and she approached gently. "She's saying she chose the red baubles because they were her mother's favorite," Juliana translated, "and that she wants you to help put the star on top tomorrow. It's tradition." Henry felt his chest tighten. "Of course, sweetheart. Of course I'll help." Sophie smiled and ran back to the rug, where she had some drawings scattered. Henry remained standing there, looking at Juliana with a mixture of admiration and something he couldn't name. It wasn't jealousy, it wasn't discomfort. It was deeper. It was the painful realization that this woman, in just one day, had achieved something he hadn't been able to for years, making Sophie truly smile. "You know BSL," Henry said, more a statement than a question. "I do," Juliana replied, slightly averting her gaze. "I learned a few years ago." The agency didn't mention that. I didn't think it was necessary to mention, but when I saw on the registration that Sophie had partial deafness, I thought it might be useful. "Useful," Henry repeated with a sad smile. "That's a modest way of putting it." Juliana didn't reply. She just lowered her eyes and began to collect some toys scattered around the room. Henry noticed that she avoided prolonged eye contact, as if she were used to going unnoticed, to occupying as little space as possible. There was something contained in her, a kind of fragility, carefully hidden beneath her professional demeanor. "Have you had dinner?" Henry asked, trying to break the silence. "Not yet, but it's okay. I'm going home in a few minutes." "Stay, please. I was going to prepare something simple for Sophie and me. It would be nice to have company." Juliana hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the idea, but Sophie, who had noticed the conversation even without hearing all the words, came running and pulled the nanny's hand, making the gesture for eating and pointing to the table. Juliana looked at the girl and then at Henry, and finally conceded. "All right. Thank you." Dinner was a strange and comforting experience at the same time. Henry prepared a simple pasta with tomato sauce, one of the few things he knew how to make reasonably well, and Sophie insisted that Juliana sit at the table with them. The girl even helped set the table, placing the plates and cutlery with a care Henry hadn't seen in her for months. During the meal, the girl gestured animatedly, telling about her day, about the decorations, about a butterfly she had seen in the garden that morning, and Juliana translated patiently, sometimes adding details Sophie forgot to mention. She said the butterfly was yellow and black, and that it stayed on the window for a long time, Juliana translated with a smile, and that she made a drawing for you. It's on the fridge. Henry looked at Sophie, who nodded enthusiastically, pointing to the fridge. He stood up, picked up the drawing, and felt his heart ache. It was a colourful butterfly, carefully painted, and in the bottom corner was written in shaky child's handwriting, "For Daddy." "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Henry said, his voice choked. "I'll keep it forever." Sophie smiled, satisfied, and went back to eating. Henry watched the two, fascinated by the fluidity of their communication. Their gestures were so natural, so expressive, that they seemed to have a life of their own. Every hand movement carried emotion, intention, meaning. He tried to reproduce some clumsily, and Sophie laughed, gently correcting him, taking her father's hands and adjusting the position of his fingers. "You're trying to say thank you, but you're actually saying sorry," Juliana explained, smiling for the first time with less tension, with a spontaneity that made her look younger. "You just need to change the direction of your hand. Look." She demonstrated again, and Henry paid attention to every detail. He tried once more, focused, and this time he got it right. Sophie clapped her hands, happy, and Henry felt a wave of emotion so strong that he had to blink several times to hold back tears. It was the first time in a long time that he felt he could reach her, even if for a brief moment, even if imperfectly. After dinner, Sophie began to yawn, and Juliana took her to brush her teeth and put on her pajamas. Henry stayed in the living room, clearing the dishes, still trying to process everything that had happened that day. When Juliana returned, the girl was almost asleep in her arms. Henry carried her to her room, gently laid her down and covered her with the blanket. Sophie mumbled something incomprehensible and fell asleep instantly. Back in the living room, Henry found Juliana already with her bag slung over her shoulder, ready to leave. She seemed anxious to go, as if she felt uncomfortable prolonging her presence there. "Thank you," Henry said. "For dinner, for the decorations, for everything." "It was a pleasure," Juliana replied with a brief smile. "Sophie is an amazing girl." She is. There was a pause. Henry wanted to say something more, but didn't know exactly what. He wanted to ask why she knew BSL, where she came from, what had brought her there. But he felt it wasn't the right time. Juliana was already moving away, walking towards the door. "Until tomorrow, then," she said, before stepping out into the cold Manchester night. Henry stood still at the door, watching her go down the stairs and disappear around the corner. Only then did he realize that the house, for the first time in years, seemed less empty. There was a smell of food still in the air. There were decorations on the walls. There was something that resembled life. That night, Henry took a long time to fall asleep. He kept thinking about the way Juliana communicated with Sophie, the ease with which the girl opened up to her, the instant connection that had formed between the two. And he also thought about himself, about how he had failed to learn his own daughter's language, about how he had allowed the distance to grow between them. Marianne would know what to do. Marianne always knew. But Marianne was no longer there, and Henry needed to accept that he was alone on this journey. Or perhaps not so alone after all. The next day, Henry woke up early, made coffee, and got everything organized before leaving for work. When Juliana arrived, promptly at 8 in the morning, Sophie was already awake and ran to greet her with a tight hug. Henry observed the scene from the kitchen, feeling that strange emotion again, a mixture of gratitude and inadequacy. During breakfast, Henry tried to talk more with Juliana, to find out a little about her, but the young woman was reserved, answered with short sentences, and always diverted the conversation back to Sophie or to the house routine. He noticed that she avoided talking about herself, as if she carried secrets she didn't want to share. But Henry didn't insist. He respected her silence, even if curiosity gnawed at him. As he left for work, Henry kissed Sophie's forehead and waved to Juliana. "See you tonight." The day at the office passed slowly. Henry worked as an architect in a firm in central Manchester, in an old building on Market Street, that overlooked the constant movement of the pedestrian precinct. He and 5 other architects shared a large room with big windows, drawing tables, and modern computers. Although he liked what he did, although he was proud of some projects he had developed, over the years lately, he felt disconnected from everything. He spent hours drawing residential projects, participating in meetings with clients, reviewing plans for commercial buildings, but his mind always returned home, to Sophie, to the constant feeling that he was failing at what mattered most. That day, however, something was different. Henry found himself thinking about Juliana, about the way she moved through the house with a presence that was both discreet and striking, about the way she looked at Sophie with an affection that seemed genuine, not forced, not overly professional. There was something about her that intrigued him, a hidden sadness in her eyes that he recognized, because he also carried his own. It was as if the two were survivors of different shipwrecks, trying to stay afloat in turbulent waters. During the afternoon meeting, while a talkative client explained for the 5th time how he wanted the facade of the new medical office, Henry realized that he was eager to go home. It wasn't just for Sophie, it was also for the possibility of seeing Juliana again, of observing that connection that moved him, and made him feel at the same time grateful and inadequate. He decided to go home early. He had no specific reason, just a sudden urge to be there, to see Sophie, to observe once more that interaction that moved him so much. When he arrived, around 4 in the afternoon, he found the living room door ajar and heard laughter coming from inside. He entered silently and saw Sophie and Juliana on the living room floor, surrounded by building blocks of all colors. They were building a tower together, following an apparently elaborate design Sophie had drawn on a paper next to them. With each piece they placed, Sophie made a triumphant gesture, and Juliana responded with claps, with smiles, with that infinite patience that seemed to come naturally to her. The scene was so simple, so everyday, and at the same time so full of affection that Henry felt his chest tighten. This was how it should be. This was how Marianne did it, with that total devotion, that ability to truly be present. This was how he had never been able to do it, always divided between work, worries, the inability to truly connect with his daughter. Juliana was the first to notice his presence. She quickly stood up, smoothing her clothes with that nervous gesture Henry was beginning to recognize as characteristic of her. "Mr. Thompson, I wasn't expecting you back so soon." "I finished early today," Henry explained, trying to sound casual, as if he hadn't practically fled the office just to be there. "I thought I'd spend more time with Sophie." Sophie ran to him with that contagious enthusiasm of children, pulling him by the hand and dragging him closer to the block tower. She made a series of quick gestures, and Henry looked at Juliana, lost, trying to decipher what his daughter was saying but failing, miserably. "She wants you to help finish the tower," Juliana translated, squatting down beside them again. "And then she wants you to learn the sign for star, because it's her Christmas theme this year. She said her mom always made paper stars to decorate the house." Henry felt a pang in his heart at the mention of Marianne, but he didn't let sadness take over. He nodded, determined to be present, to do things differently. Henry sat on the floor next to his daughter, feeling awkward and out of place in his crumpled suit and dress shoes, but determined to try. Sophie handed him a red block, explaining with gestures where he should place it. He carefully positioned it on top of the tower, holding his breath as the balance adjusted. The girl applauded, happy, and Henry smiled, feeling absurdly proud for having completed that simple task correctly. Then she made a gesture with her hands, opening and closing her fingers in a star-like way, repeating it several times for her father to learn. "That's the sign for star," Juliana explained, crouching beside them. "Try it." Henry tried to reproduce the movement, but his fingers seemed stiff, clumsy. Sophie laughed, but not cruelly. It was a patient, encouraging laugh. Juliana gently took his hand, adjusting the position of his fingers, and Henry felt an electric current run through his arm at her touch. It was a simple, professional gesture, but there was something there, a subtle tension that neither of them could ignore. "Like this," Juliana said, her voice a little lower. "Now try again." Henry tried, and this time he succeeded. Sophie clapped again, and Juliana quickly released his hand as if she had realized she had been holding it for too long. She moved away, returning to the kitchen with the excuse of preparing an afternoon snack. Henry stayed there playing with Sophie, trying to learn more signs, making mistakes, getting it right, laughing with her. It was the first time since Marianne left that he felt truly present, truly connected with his daughter, and he knew that this was only possible because of Juliana. Later, after Sophie had dinner and gone to sleep, exhausted after a full day of playing, Henry found Juliana in the kitchen, washing dishes with that meticulousness that seemed to be part of her personality. Each plate was washed with attention, each glass rinsed carefully. He picked up a dish towel and began drying dishes beside her, and for a few minutes they worked in silence, a silence that was not uncomfortable, but full of a strange intimacy that neither of them expected to feel. Finally, Henry gathered the courage to ask the question that had been burning in his mind since the day before. "Why did you never mention that you knew BSL?" Juliana paused, her hands immersed in soapy water, her shoulders visibly tensing. She stayed like that for a few seconds, as if deciding how much she could reveal, how much was safe to share. "I didn't think it was important," she finally said, her voice so low that Henry had to lean closer to hear. "What do you mean it's not important?" Henry put the plate he was drying on the counter and turned completely to her. "You're changing my daughter's life. You're changing my life. That's more than important." Juliana didn't answer immediately. She continued washing dishes with mechanical movements, as if she needed that time to organize her words, to decide what to say and what to hide. Finally, she took a deep breath and said, "I learned BSL a few years ago. I worked at a school for deaf children in Edinburgh. It was a good time in my life, perhaps the best." "Why did you stop?" Henry realized he was being intrusive, but couldn't hold back the question. Juliana visibly stiffened, her whole body tensing. Her hands stopped in the water, and she stared at the foam as if something only she could see was written there. "Because I needed to start over somewhere else," she said, and the way she pronounced the words made it clear she didn't want to talk about it anymore. "Because sometimes life doesn't let us stay where we want to stay." Henry realized he had touched on something delicate. He didn't insist. He just continued drying the dishes, respecting her silence. But he felt there was much more to that story, layers Juliana wasn't ready to reveal. When they finished, Juliana picked up her bag and prepared to leave. Henry accompanied her to the door, and before she left, he said, "Thank you, truly, for everything you're doing." Juliana looked at him with an expression Henry couldn't decipher. There was gratitude there, but also fear, as if she feared that connection would grow too much, that it would become something she couldn't control. "You're welcome, Mr. Thompson. See you tomorrow." Henry stood at the door, watching her go down the stairs and disappear into the cold Manchester night. Only then did he hear it, a muffled sound, almost imperceptible, Juliana's phone vibrating in her pocket. She stopped, took out the device, looked at the screen, and visibly paled. She hesitated, as if debating whether to answer or not, and finally put the phone back without responding. Henry observed everything from that distance, intrigued and worried. Something was wrong, something Juliana was hiding, something that scared her. But he said nothing. He just closed the door and went back inside, as the cold night enveloped the city, and Juliana's secrets remained locked away in some dark corner of her past. The following days unfolded into a strange and comfortable routine at the same time. Juliana arrived every morning promptly at 8, always impeccable, always with that contained smile that didn't reveal much. She cared for Sophie with an affection that went beyond the professional, helped around the house with a quiet efficiency, and gradually began to teach Henry the basic signs of BSL. She had infinite patience with him, repeating gestures as many times as necessary, gently correcting the position of his hands, never showing frustration when he made mistakes. Henry made an effort, learning slowly, but learning. And with each gesture he got right, he felt he was getting a little closer to his daughter, tearing down another brick from that invisible wall that had risen between them since Marianne left. Sophie was patient with her father, encouraging him with smiles, correcting him gently, clearly happy to see him trying. Mornings gained a new dynamic. Henry began to have breakfast with the two of them before leaving for work, and those 30 minutes became his favorite part of the day. Sophie recounted her dreams using quick gestures that Juliana translated, and Henry shared small stories from work, trying to use some signs he had learned. These were simple, even trivial moments, but they carried a meaning Henry hadn't felt in years. Sophie flourished. It was the only word Henry could find to describe the girl's transformation. She smiled more, played more, seemed lighter, more alive. The drawings she made had more vibrant colors. The stories she told were more animated. And whenever she saw Juliana arrive in the morning, she ran to hug her with an intensity that moved and scared Henry at the same time, because he knew it could be temporary, that nannies came and went, that nothing guaranteed Juliana would stay. And the idea of losing that, of seeing Sophie regress to that silent sadness she had lived in for the past few years, was unbearable. But there was also something else growing there, something Henry tried to ignore, but which became increasingly difficult to deny. The way his heart quickened when he heard her voice in the morning, when he came home and saw her in the kitchen preparing dinner. The way he sought excuses to come home earlier, inventing cancelled appointments, meetings that ended sooner than expected. The way their glances crossed by chance and lingered a second longer than necessary, creating a tension neither of them knew how to handle. Henry felt guilty about it. He felt he was betraying Marianne's memory, that he was being inappropriate with an employee, that he was confusing gratitude with something else. He spent sleepless nights staring at the bedroom ceiling, debating with himself. Marianne was the love of his life. She had been, still was in a way. How could he be feeling something like this for someone else only 3 years later? How could he be betraying that memory, that love that had been so pure and true? But the truth was that Juliana had brought something back to that house. It wasn't just joy, it wasn't just the connection with Sophie, it was hope. It was the feeling that perhaps, just perhaps, life could make sense again, that he wasn't condemned to live forever in that limbo of longing and guilt. It was the possibility that a future existed beyond the pain, beyond the loss. And at the same time, Henry saw that Juliana also carried her own demons. There were moments when she withdrew, when something dark passed through her eyes, and she became distant, lost in thoughts that clearly tormented her. The phone that vibrated and she systematically ignored, the restless look that appeared out of nowhere, as if she were waiting for something bad to happen at any moment. The way she sometimes seemed ready to flee, even when she was smiling, even when she seemed happy there. He wanted to ask, he wanted to help, but he didn't know how. He didn't want to invade, he didn't want to scare her. On Christmas Eve, Henry decided to do something special. He spent the whole day thinking about it, mentally rehearsing how he would approach the subject, as nervous as a teenager about to make an important invitation. When he arrived home that night, he found Sophie and Juliana in the living room, drawing Christmas cards. The girl was concentrated, her tongue between her teeth, carefully coloring a golden star. Henry took a deep breath and approached. "Juliana," he said, and noticed his voice came out more hesitant than he intended. "I wanted to invite you." Juliana looked up, surprised. "Yes, Mr. Thompson." "Please call me Henry. Mr. Thompson makes me feel old." She smiled slightly, but said nothing. "I wanted to invite you to dinner with us tomorrow on Christmas. Sophie has asked me several times, and I would also really like you to stay." Juliana hesitated, and Henry saw the internal battle unfold in her eyes. She wanted to accept. He could see that. But there was something holding her back, some fear, some reason to keep her. Distance. Sophie, who had noticed the conversation even without hearing all the words, dropped her colored pencils and ran to Juliana, pulling her hand and making insistent gestures. "She's saying she's already chosen a present for you," Henry translated, trying to help, a bit clumsy with the signs but doing his best, "and that it won't be the same if you're not here." Juliana looked at the girl, at those big, hopeful eyes, and finally gave in. "All right," she said, with a shy but genuine smile. "I'll come." Sophie exploded with joy, hugging Juliana so tightly she almost knocked her over. Henry laughed, feeling his heart lighter than it had been in a long time. For the first time since Marianne left, Christmas seemed to have some meaning again. And so, as Manchester prepared to celebrate another Christmas, as the streets filled with lights and families gathered, Henry, Sophie and Juliana also prepared for something none of the three could fully name. Something that felt like a new beginning, like healing, like the possibility that the broken pieces could fit together again and form something new. But Juliana's past waited in the shadows, and sooner or later it would have to be faced. Christmas morning dawned cold in Manchester, with a grey sky that threatened rain but had not yet delivered. Henry woke early, even before his alarm clock, even before Sophie showed signs of life in the next room. He lay in bed for a few minutes, staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence of the still sleeping house, thinking about how this day would be different from the last 3 Christmases. In previous years, it had just been him and Sophie, trying to maintain the traditions Marianne had established, but always with that suffocating weight of absence, that emptiness that no decoration could fill, no gift could disguise. This year, for the first time, there was a small spark of hope, a feeling that perhaps they could create new memories without erasing the old ones, perhaps they could move forward without feeling guilty about it. Henry looked at Marianne's photo on the bedside table, that image he had kept there since she left. She smiled in the photo, her face lit by the sun, her hair blowing in the wind. It had been taken on a trip to the coast on one of those perfect days that seemed tailor-made for happiness. "Would you agree with this?" he asked the photo mentally. "Would you agree that I try again, that I let someone into our lives?" There was no answer, of course, but Henry chose to believe that Marianne wouldn't want him to spend the rest of his life trapped in the past. She had always been too generous to wish that for him. He got up carefully to avoid making noise, put on a bathrobe, and went to the kitchen. He brewed strong coffee, just the way he liked it, and began to organize the ingredients for lunch. He had decided to make the turkey Marianne always prepared, following the recipe she had written down in an old floral-covered notebook that he kept as a treasure, full of her notes, corrections, observations about what worked and what didn't. As he patiently seasoned the meat, his hands trembled slightly, not from culinary nervousness, but from the awareness that this day marked something important, a kind of dividing line between before and after, between the man he was and the man he was trying to become. Sophie appeared in the kitchen, still in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes, and upon seeing her father working by the stove, she ran to hug him. "Merry Christmas, sweetheart," Henry said, trying to make the sign Juliana had taught him. Sophie laughed at the clumsy way he moved his hands, but returned the hug tightly, and Henry felt his heart warm. They had breakfast together, communicating through gestures and words, Henry still stumbling over the signs but genuinely trying, and Sophie patient and encouraging as always. The girl was excited, talking about Christmas, about Juliana, about the presents waiting to be opened under the tree. Henry watched his daughter and felt immense gratitude for that woman who in a few days had brought the light back to her eyes. Juliana arrived promptly at noon as they had agreed. When Henry opened the door, he had to make a conscious effort not to gape. She wore a simple wine-colored dress that highlighted her fair skin and brown hair, which for the first time he saw loose, falling in soft waves over her shoulders. She had applied light makeup, just enough to accentuate her brown eyes and naturally pink lips. In her hands, she carried a dish covered with aluminum foil and a shy smile that made her seem younger, more vulnerable. "I brought a trifle," she said, lifting the dish. "It's my grandmother's recipe. I hope you like it." Henry finally realized he had been staring and quickly stepped aside to let her in. "I'm sure we'll love it, and you look beautiful. The dress looks very nice on you." Juliana visibly blushed, lowering her eyes shyly. "Thank you. You look very good too." Indeed, Henry had made an effort. He wore a light blue dress shirt that Marianne always said matched his eyes, and had even put on a discreet cologne. He felt ridiculously nervous, as if this were a real date and not just a Christmas lunch. Sophie came running and hugged Juliana enthusiastically, pulling her by the hand and dragging her into the living room where the Christmas tree shone with all its lights on. The girl gestured animatedly, showing every detail of the decorations they had made themselves, and Juliana responded with the same energy, both pairs of hands dancing in the air in a conversation that Henry watched with fascination and a pang of envy for the fluidity of that communication. Lunch was ready around 2 in the afternoon. Henry had put a lot of effort into it, and although the turkey wasn't as perfect as Marianne's, a bit too golden in some spots and a little dry in others, it was good enough. He had also prepared savory stuffing, rice with raisins, creamy potato salad, and had even tried to make the French toast that was a family tradition. They sat at the table, the three of them together, and for the first time in a long time, that large mahogany table, which could seat 8 people and was always too empty, didn't seem disproportionate. They talked, laughed, shared stories. Sophie talked about school, about her friends, about the things she liked to do, gesturing enthusiastically. Juliana translated when necessary, but less and less, because Henry was beginning to understand more signs on his own, proud each time he managed to grasp the meaning without needing help. During dessert, the trifle Juliana had brought, and which was absolutely delicious, Sophie suddenly got up from her chair and ran to the tree. She came back holding a small package, carefully decorated with gold paper and a red ribbon. She placed the gift in front of Juliana and made the sign, for open. Juliana looked at the package, then at Sophie, then at Henry, as if asking for permission or confirmation that it was real. Henry just nodded, smiling. "It's for you." Sophie chose it especially. With trembling hands, Juliana untied the ribbon and carefully opened the paper, as if she wanted to preserve every detail. Inside was a small velvet box, and when she opened it, her eyes filled with tears. It was a delicate necklace with a small golden star hanging from a thin chain. Sophie gestured animatedly, and Henry translated with a choked voice. "She said she chose the star because you light up her life like a star lights up the night." Juliana covered her mouth with her hand, tears finally streaming down her face. She pulled Sophie into a tight hug, holding the girl as if she wanted to engrave that moment in her memory forever. When they separated, Juliana took the necklace out of the box and asked Henry to help her put it on. He approached, his hands clumsy with the delicate clasp, and when he finally managed to fasten it, his fingers lightly brushed the nape of her neck and both felt that electric current that had been becoming increasingly frequent. "Thank you," Juliana whispered, touching the star with reverence. "No one has ever given me a gift like this. Not in this way, not from a place that feels so much like home." The words carried a weight that Henry couldn't ignore. There was pain there, an untold story, a past Juliana tried to keep locked away. But he didn't ask. He just smiled and said, "You deserve this, and much more." After lunch, they sat in the living room to open the other presents. Sophie received books, toys, new clothes, and with each unwrapped package her joy was contagious. Henry received a tie that Sophie had chosen herself, horribly colourful, but which he promised to wear with pride. And Juliana, besides the necklace, received from Henry a book on the history of BSL in the UK, a subtle way of recognising and valuing what she had brought into their lives. In the afternoon, while Sophie played with her new toys, Henry and Juliana washed dishes together in the kitchen, that domestic task that was becoming their ritual, a moment of silent closeness. Juliana seemed more relaxed than Henry had ever seen her, smiling more easily, talking a little more about herself. "Do you have family in Manchester?" Henry asked, passing a plate for her to dry. "No," Juliana replied, her voice becoming a little tenser, her shoulders stiffening slightly. "I don't have family anywhere, actually. My parents passed away when I was very young, just turned 18, a car accident on the road. And I don't have siblings. I was always an only child." "I'm so sorry, Juliana. That must have been very difficult." Juliana shrugged, as if accustomed to that condition, as if she had learned long ago not to expect solace. "That's life. You learn to move on. You learn you have no choice but to continue, one foot in front of the other, one day at a time. And in Edinburgh, you said you worked there with deaf children. Why did you leave? It was a job you loved." The question made Juliana stop completely. She stood motionless, looking at the plate in her hands, the tap water running without her noticing, and Henry realized he had touched a sensitive nerve, a wound that had not yet fully healed. He was about to apologize, to say that she didn't have to answer if she didn't want to. When she finally spoke, her voice low and laden with something that sounded like fear, shame, regret. I had a life there, a job I loved, a small but cozy apartment in the Old Town neighborhood, friends I considered family, a routine that made me feel like I'd finally found my place in the world. I worked at a wonderful school with incredible children, and I felt fulfilled in a way I had never felt before. But something happened, and I needed to start over. I needed to leave everything behind and run away. Sometimes you don't have a choice, Henry. Sometimes life forces you to abandon everything you've built. What happened? Henry asked gently, putting the cloth aside and turning completely to her, giving her his full attention. Juliana put the plate aside, turned off the tap, and finally looked at Henry, her eyes full of a vulnerability she rarely let show, full of tears she tried to hold back. I was in a relationship with a man named Mark. At first, everything was perfect, you know. He was attentive, affectionate, made me feel special. I thought it was forever. I thought I had finally found a place where I could belong, someone who truly loved me. But little by little, things changed. He started to become controlling, possessive. He wanted to know where I was all the time, who I was talking to, what I was doing. At first I thought it was just because he loved me, that it was concern. But it got worse. Henry felt a tightening in his chest, a rage growing inside him. He hurt you? Juliana hesitated, wiping away a tear that had escaped, and then nodded almost imperceptibly. Not in the way you're thinking. He never laid a hand on me, never left visible marks, but he hurt me in other ways. Ways that sometimes hurt more and last longer, with words that destroyed my self-esteem, with manipulations that made me doubt my own sanity, with a control that suffocated me day after day. And when I finally gathered the courage to break up, when I said I couldn't take it anymore, he didn't accept it. He said I was his, that I would always be his, that no one else would want me. He started stalking me, showing up at places I went, calling non-stop, sending threatening messages. I had to resign from the school, move apartments, and when that wasn't enough, I had to move cities completely, start from scratch, with no references, nothing, just trying to disappear. That's why the calls, Henry said, remembering the constantly vibrating phone that Juliana always ignored. She nodded again. He found me. I don't know how, but he found me. He started calling again, sending messages. For now it's just that, but I know what he's like. I know he won't stop. Did you go to the police? I did. Several times. But he's careful, never does anything that's technically illegal. He just persists, and that terrifies me because I know at some point he'll get tired of just calling. He'll want more. Henry felt a wave of protection wash over him, a fierce desire to keep that woman safe, to prevent any harm from reaching her. You're not alone in this, he said, taking her hand. Not anymore. We'll help you. I'll help you. Juliana looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and fear. Henry, I don't want to bring my problems to you. You've already been through so much. It wouldn't be fair. It's not about what's fair, it's about doing what's right, and you don't deserve to live with this fear. They stood there, hands intertwined, looking at each other, and Henry felt that something fundamental had changed between them. It was no longer just gratitude, it was no longer just attraction. It was something deeper, more significant. It was connection, it was care, it was the feeling that perhaps they were becoming something neither of them expected, but both needed. The moment was interrupted by Sophie, who came running into the kitchen wanting to show a drawing she had made. Juliana quickly let go of Henry's hand and knelt to be at the girl's height, admiring the drawing with genuine interest. Henry watched the two and felt his chest tighten with emotion. There, in that simple kitchen, on that improbable Christmas, something that looked very much like a family was forming. Later, when the sky was already dark and the rain that had been threatening all day finally began to fall, Juliana said she needed to go. Henry insisted that she stay longer, but she was firm, saying she had already imposed too much on their hospitality. Sophie was visibly sad about her departure, but Juliana promised she would return the next day as always. Henry walked her to the door. The rain was falling fine and cold outside, and he offered to drive her home. But Juliana refused, saying she lived nearby and liked to walk. Before leaving, she turned to him, her hand lightly touching the necklace Sophie had given her. "Thank you for today," she said, her voice choked. "It was the best Christmas I've had in a long time." "For us too," Henry replied. "Thank you very much for being here, for everything." They stood there for a moment, so close that Henry could feel her warmth, see the raindrops beginning to form in her hair. He wanted to kiss her, felt an almost irresistible urge to close that tiny distance between them, but he restrained himself. It wasn't the right time, not like this. There was still too much unresolved, too many shadows still lingering over them. "Good night, Juliana," he finally said, taking a step back. "Good night, Henry." She went down the stairs and disappeared into the fine rain, and Henry stood at the door watching until he could no longer see her. Only then did he realize that she had called him by his first name for the first time, not Mr. Thompson, Henry, and that small detail made him smile like a lovesick fool. The days following Christmas, the routine returned, but transformed. Juliana continued to arrive every morning, but now there was a different intimacy between her and Henry, a mutual awareness that made every interaction charged with meaning. The glances they exchanged lasted a little longer, accidental touches caused shivers, conversations deepened more and more. Henry started coming home earlier whenever possible, inventing excuses at work, rearranging meetings, doing whatever was necessary to have more time with Sophie and, if he was honest with himself, with Juliana too. He began to help more with household chores, not because Juliana needed help, but because he wanted an excuse to be near her. One afternoon, a few days after Christmas, while Sophie had occupational therapy at a specialized clinic in the Chorlton-cum-Hardy neighborhood, and Juliana took advantage of those 2 quiet hours to clean the house and catch up on household chores, Henry arrived home from work earlier than usual. He had left the office right after lunch, inventing an excuse about a headache that didn't actually exist, driven only by the inexplicable desire to be home, to see Juliana, to have a few moments alone with her away from Sophie's attentive and curious eyes. He found her in the living room, organizing books on the tall bookshelf that occupied an entire wall. She was standing on a small aluminum ladder, reaching the higher shelves, and wore a simple t-shirt and jeans, her hair tied in a messy bun from which a few rebellious strands escaped. There was something in the way she moved, in the concentration with which she organized each book by size and color, in the way she lightly bit her lower lip when she was thinking, that fascinated him in a way he couldn't fully explain. "Need any help?" he offered, finally announcing his presence after a few seconds of silently observing her. Juliana started slightly, the book she was holding almost slipping from her hands. "Henry, you startled me. I didn't hear you come in. Shouldn't you be at work? I left early. I thought I could take the opportunity to spend some time here before picking up Sophie. Let me help you with that." He approached the ladder, and Juliana carefully descended, passing the remaining books to him as she explained the organization system she was implementing. They worked in silence for a few minutes, a comfortable and intimate silence, and then Henry, not knowing exactly where the courage came from, asked, "Have you ever thought about staying in Manchester? I mean, permanently? Making this your home, your city, truly putting down roots?" Juliana paused, a book forgotten in her hands. "I don't know if I'm good at putting down roots, Henry. I've spent so much time running that I don't know what it means to stay anymore. You don't have to run here, not from us." She looked at him, her eyes full of a vulnerability that broke his heart. "But what if he finds me? What if my presence here puts you in danger? I would never forgive myself if something happened to Sophie because of me. We'll deal with it together. You don't have to carry this fear alone." Juliana wanted to believe. Henry could see in her eyes the desire to trust, to allow herself to stay, to build something there. But he also saw the fear, the uncertainty, the scars of someone who had tried and failed before. Henry stepped down from the ladder and stood before her, so close he could see the small golden flecks in her brown eyes. "You deserve to be happy, Juliana. You deserve to have a place to call your own, and if you want, that place can be here." The words hung in the air between them, charged with promise and possibility. Juliana opened her mouth to reply, but at that exact moment, the phone in her pocket vibrated, and vibrated again and again. She visibly paled, her whole body tensing. Henry felt anger rise. "Is it him?" Juliana just nodded, taking the phone out of her pocket with trembling hands. The screen showed 5 missed calls from the same unknown number, and as they watched, the phone vibrated once more. "Answer it," Henry said. "Answer it and put it on speaker. I want to hear." "No, Henry. That will only make things worse. Nothing will make it worse than it already is. Answer it." Juliana hesitated, but finally answered, her hand trembling so much that Henry had to hold the phone with her. The voice that came from the device was masculine, too soft, too controlled, in a way that immediately made the hidden danger clear. "Juliana, darling, why aren't you answering my calls?" "Because I don't want to talk to you, Mark. I've told you that 1,000 times. Don't be like that. You know we're meant to be together. You know you'll come back to me. It's just a matter of time." "I won't come back. Never. Stop calling me. Stop stalking me. Rebuild your life and let me rebuild mine." The voice grew colder, more threatening. "You think you can run from me? I found you in Manchester, Juliana. I know where you live. I know where you work. I know about the deaf child, about the widowed father. You seem so happy, so united. It would be a shame if something ruined all that happiness." Henry felt his blood boil. "Who do you think you are to threaten my family?" There was a pause on the other end, and then a low, unpleasant laugh. "Ah, so the widowed father speaks. How touching. You think you can protect her, do you? You think you can keep me away?" "I know I can. And if you come near her or my daughter, you'll regret it." "We'll see how long that courage lasts," Mark said before abruptly hanging up. Juliana was trembling violently now, and Henry pulled her into a hug, feeling her collapse against his chest. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed. "I'm so sorry I brought this to you. I should leave. I should disappear again before he does something." "You're not going anywhere," Henry said firmly. "Tomorrow morning we're going to the police. We're going to report everything. We're going to get a restraining order. And I'm going to install security cameras at the house. I'm going to make sure you and Sophie are safe. But you're not running away, not this time." Juliana pulled back slightly, looking at him with red, swollen eyes. "Why are you doing this? Why do you care so much?" Henry gently touched her face, wiping a tear with his thumb. "Because you're important to me. To us. Because I can't imagine this house without you anymore. Because when I look at you, I see someone strong, courageous, special, and I want a chance to get to know that person better, without fear, without threats. Henry." He leaned in and finally kissed her. It was a soft kiss, full of promise, of protection, of all the things he couldn't put into words. Juliana hesitated for an instant, and then responded, her hands rising to his face, deepening that moment they had both been avoiding and desiring in equal measure. When they separated, both were breathless, foreheads touching, hearts racing, the world around them seeming to have completely disappeared. "This changes everything," Juliana whispered, her voice trembling. "I know," Henry replied, gently stroking her cheek with his thumb. "What if it goes wrong? What if he manages to separate us? What if my presence here ends up destroying everything you've built with Sophie?" Henry held her face with both hands, forcing her to look into his eyes. "Then we fight to stay together. But at least we fight. At least we try. At least we don't let fear decide for us. I spent 3 years letting fear control my life, Juliana. Fear of living without Marianne. Fear of being an inadequate father. Fear of moving on. And you know what happened? I lost 3 years. 3 years I could have spent truly connected with my daughter. 3 years I wasted just surviving instead of living. I don't want to do that again. I don't want to look back years from now and regret not having tried." Juliana nodded, tears finally overflowing, but this time they weren't tears of fear or sadness. They were tears of relief, of hope, of finally allowing herself to believe that perhaps she deserved something good. And for the first time since Henry had met her, he saw something beyond fear in her eyes. He saw hope. He saw the possibility of a future that might work out. He saw the courage to believe again. They stayed there, embraced in the now almost dark living room as afternoon turned into night, hearing only the sound of each other's breathing and the distant tick-tock of the clock on the wall. While outside, the cold Manchester wind swept the streets and shadows grew inside for the first time, those shadows didn't seem so frightening. Because for the first time, Juliana wasn't facing them alone. She had someone by her side, willing to fight together, willing to protect her, willing to build something new on the ruins of the past. And Henry discovered that in trying to protect her, he was also saving himself. He was allowing himself to live again, to love again, to believe that the future could be more than just survival. It could be a new beginning. It could be happiness. It could be a second chance that neither of them thought they deserved, but which both were willing to seize with all their might. Even knowing that the road ahead would be difficult, even knowing that there would be obstacles, even knowing that Mark was still out there, waiting for his chance to destroy everything. The days following the confrontation with George were the most tense Henry had ever lived. He hired a lawyer specializing in family law and domestic violence, gathered all possible documentation, and accompanied Juliana to the police station to file the report. It was difficult. Juliana had to relive every detail of the abusive marriage, every aggression, every threat. Henry held her hand throughout the process, and when they left, she was exhausted but relieved. She had finally done something. She had finally taken the first step towards true freedom. The restraining order was issued 2 days later. George could not approach Juliana within 200 meters. He could not make contact by phone, message, or any other means. If he violated it, he would be arrested. It seemed safe, but both Juliana and Henry knew that paper doesn't always stop determined people. Meanwhile, Juliana called Claire, the friend who had saved her, who had taught her BSL, who had given her the courage to flee. Claire lived in Liverpool with her daughter Beatrice, and when Juliana told her about George's threats, she didn't hesitate. She took the first available bus ticket and arrived in Manchester the next morning, bringing with her little Beatrice, now 8 years old, and 2 bags with essentials. Henry welcomed them into the apartment with the same hospitality he had shown Juliana. Claire was a woman in her 40s, grey hair tied in a bun, tired but kind eyes. Beatrice was a lively girl, with curly hair and a wide smile, who immediately connected with Sophie. The two began to converse in BSL as if they were old friends, and Juliana watched it with a heart both aching and grateful. "Thank you for having us," Claire said, shaking Henry's hand. "I know it must be strange to open your home to 2 strangers." "You're not strangers." Henry smiled. "You saved Juliana. That makes you family." Claire looked at Juliana, who stood beside her, and smiled. "You found good people, girl. Finally." Juliana nodded, too emotional to speak. The following days were a strange mix of normality and tension. During the day, the routine continued. Sophie and Beatrice went to school, Juliana and Claire took care of the house, Henry worked, but always came home early. At night, everyone had dinner together, talked, laughed. The girls played, and it was beautiful to see Sophie so animated, so alive. Beatrice's presence had brought an unexpected lightness to the house. The 2 girls spent hours talking in BSL, creating secret codes, playing teacher, drawing. Sophie seemed more self-assured, more confident. And Beatrice, always patient and affectionate, treated her friend as if she were a sister. But at night, when everyone went to sleep, the tension returned in full force. Juliana stayed awake, looking out the window, waiting for George to appear. Henry slept on the sofa, keeping her company, ready for any emergency. In the first few nights, they tried to keep conversations light, but the fear was too great to ignore. So they began to sit in silence, just holding hands, letting each other's presence be enough. Claire and the girls stayed in the guest room, and the apartment, once so silent and empty, was now filled with life and fear. It was a strange contradiction. There was love growing there, but there was also a shadow that threatened everything at any moment. George didn't appear, but he sent messages through unknown numbers, bypassing the block. Short, always threatening messages. "You think a piece of paper will stop me? You know I always get what I want. A week is up, Juliana. I'm losing my patience." Juliana showed the messages to the lawyer, who attached them to the case. Each message was more evidence, another nail in George's coffin. But that didn't lessen the fear, because men like him didn't care about laws. They cared about control, and George was losing control. It was on a Saturday afternoon that everything exploded. Henry had gone out to buy groceries, leaving Juliana and Claire at home with the girls. They were in the living room, watching a movie, when the intercom rang. Juliana answered without thinking. It was the concierge saying there was a delivery for her. She frowned. She wasn't expecting anything, but she authorized the visitor. When the doorbell rang, Juliana opened the door and found not a delivery person, but George. He pushed her inside before she could react, entering the apartment and closing the door behind him. Claire jumped up, placing herself in front of the girls. Sophie and Beatrice were terrified, huddled on the sofa. "Get out of here, George," Juliana said, trying to keep her voice firm. "You're violating the restraining order. They'll arrest you." George laughed, a cold and cruel sound. "You think I care? You think I came all this way to leave empty-handed?" He took a step towards Juliana, and Claire moved, standing between the two. "You won't touch her." George looked at Claire with contempt. "Ah, the saint who helped her escape. You should have minded your own business, old woman. You should have stayed out of this." "I'm not leaving." Claire stood firm. "And you're leaving. Now." George ignored Claire and looked at Juliana. "You have a choice. Come with me now, peacefully, or I'll make a scene here that will ruin your new little life. I'll tell everyone who you are. I'll destroy everything you've built." Juliana felt tears stream down her face, not because she was afraid of him, but because she was tired of running, tired of hiding, tired of letting that man control her life even from afar. And at that moment, something inside her broke, not from pain, but from anger, from courage. She looked at Sophie and Beatrice, huddled on the sofa, their eyes wide with fear. She looked at Claire, who remained firm as a rock between her and George. She looked at the walls of that apartment that had become her home, her refuge, her new beginning. And she realized she couldn't let him destroy all of this. Not anymore. She had spent years diminishing herself, hiding, believing she was weak. But she wasn't. Never was. And at that moment, she finally found the strength that had always been there. "No," she said, her voice firm and clear, coming from a deep place she didn't know existed. "I'm not going with you. Never again. You can shout, you can threaten, you can do whatever you want. But I am no longer the woman you controlled. I am free, and you have no power over me." The words came out, with a force that surprised even herself. George froze for a second, as if he had been physically hit. He wasn't used to this. He wasn't used to hearing a no. He wasn't used to losing control, and that made him even more dangerous. George froze for a second, surprised. Then his face contorted with rage. "You'll regret this." He took a step forward, but Claire didn't move. And at that moment, the girls acted. Sophie picked up Juliana's phone from the coffee table and with trembling hands dialed a number. Beatrice, beside her, did the same with Claire's phone. Both knew what to do. They had been trained for this. In a matter of seconds, they were connected to emergency services, asking for help in BSL via video call with interpreters. George realized and tried to grab the phones, but Claire stopped him, holding his arm with surprising strength for her age. "You won't touch them." The apartment door suddenly opened. Henry had returned, heard agitated voices, and rushed in. Seeing George there, he dropped his shopping bags and advanced. "Get out of my house now." George turned to him, but before he could reply, the sound of sirens began to echo outside. The police were arriving. Quick, efficient. The girls had succeeded. George's expression changed. He realized he had lost. He tried to leave, but Henry blocked the door. "You're not going anywhere." Minutes later, police officers entered the apartment. George was detained, handcuffed, while shouting that it was absurd, that he just wanted to talk to his wife. But the messages, the police report, the violated restraining order, everything was documented. He would be taken away, and this time he wouldn't get out so easily. When the police finally left, taking George with them, silence filled the apartment. Juliana collapsed. She fell to her knees on the floor sobbing, years of pain and fear pouring out all at once. Claire hugged her, crying too. Henry sat beside the two, holding them, and Sophie and Beatrice, the little heroines who saved the day, hugged each other on the sofa, still scared but relieved. "It's over," Juliana murmured between sobs. "Is it really over?" "It's over," Henry confirmed, stroking her hair. "He won't hurt you anymore. Never again." And for the first time in years, Juliana believed him. The days that followed were about healing, slow but real. Claire and Beatrice stayed another week, helping Juliana process everything, to reorganize emotionally. The four women, each with her own battles and victories, spent hours talking on the balcony, sharing stories, sharing pains, sharing hopes. Claire told how she had raised Beatrice alone, after the father abandoned them upon discovering the girl's deafness. She spoke of the challenges, the prejudices, how she had learned to transform limitations into possibilities. Juliana listened with renewed admiration for the friend who had saved her, and Sophie and Beatrice, even as children, absorbed those conversations, learning about female strength, about resilience, about love that doesn't give up. The lawyer confirmed that George would be in prison for a long time. In addition to violating the restraining order, other accusations against him had come to light. Other women he had hurt, other lives he had destroyed. Justice had finally reached him. And Juliana, upon learning this, felt something she didn't expect. It wasn't joy at his imprisonment, it was relief. Relief to know that other women were having the courage to speak, relief to know that she was not alone in this pain, relief to know that the cycle was being broken. Juliana started therapy. Henry insisted, and she accepted. She needed to deal with the trauma, she needed to learn to live without fear. The first sessions were difficult. Talking about the years of abuse, about the guilt she carried, about the fear that paralyzed her, was like opening old wounds. But the therapist, an experienced and kind woman, helped Juliana understand that feeling pain was not weakness, that crying was not giving up, that seeking help was, in fact, the bravest act she could do. And little by little, session after session, Juliana allowed herself to believe that she deserved to be happy, that she deserved to build something new, that she deserved love. Claire and Beatrice returned to Liverpool, but with the promise of frequent visits. Sophie was sad about her new friend's departure, but the two agreed to video call every week, and so they did. Life returned to normal, or rather to a new normal. Juliana continued to care for Sophie, but now there was something more. There was lightness, there were laughs, there was a future, and the relationship between her and Henry grew, solid and true. They were not in a hurry. They knew that what they felt was real, that it was worth waiting for, that it was worth building calmly. One evening in March, when the summer heat was giving way to the coolness of autumn, Henry prepared a special dinner. He asked Juliana to stay, even after her shift. Sophie was excited, helping her father set the table, light candles, make everything beautiful. Juliana watched, not fully understanding, but with a warm heart. "What's going on?" she asked, laughing. "You'll see," Henry replied mysteriously. The three of them had dinner together, talking about the day, about plans for the weekend, about small things that now held so much meaning. When they finished, Sophie made a sign to Juliana. She translated for Henry, but he already knew. The girl was asking permission to go play in her room. Henry nodded, and Sophie left, leaving the two alone. Henry stood up, took Juliana's hand and led her to the balcony. Manchester at night sparkled below, cold and beautiful. They stood there side by side, looking at the lights. "Juliana," Henry began, his voice low, I spent 3 years of my life just existing. Just going through the motions, work, home, Sophie, sleep, repeat. I thought it would be like that forever, that I would never feel anything but emptiness again, until you arrived. Juliana turned to him, her eyes shining. You brought color back. You brought life. You taught me that it's not too late to start over, that it's not too late to love again. And I love you, Juliana. I love you in a way that scares me and completes me at the same time. Juliana felt tears stream down her face. I love you too, Henry, so much. He took a small box from his pocket and opened it. Inside there was a simple, delicate, beautiful ring. I'm not asking you to marry me, not yet. I know you need time to heal completely, but I'm asking for a promise. The promise that we will build this together, one day at a time, without rushing, but with certainty. Juliana looked at the ring, at Henry, and smiled even as she cried, I promise. He placed the ring on her finger and kissed her. A long, deep kiss, full of promises and new beginnings. When they separated, they heard applause. They turned and found Sophie at the balcony door, clapping and smiling widely. Juliana laughed and pulled her into a hug, and the three stood there, embraced under the Manchester stars. Months passed. The routine continued, but now each day had meaning. Sophie progressed at school, making friends, participating in activities. Henry learned BSL fluently, finally able to communicate with his daughter without barriers, and Juliana flourished. She went back to studying, took a pedagogy course, and started teaching BSL in community centers. She found purpose. She found peace. George was tried and convicted. Juliana did not attend the trial. She no longer needed to look back, only forward. And the future, for the first time, seemed bright. A year after that night on the balcony, Henry finally made the official proposal. It was simple at home, with Sophie as a witness. Juliana said yes without hesitation, and 6 months later, they married in a small ceremony, only with people who truly mattered. Claire and Beatrice were there, emotional, seeing their friend finally find the happiness she so deserved. Henry's colleagues, Sophie's teachers, true friends who supported them throughout the process, family. The ceremony took place in a garden in Manchester on a sunny spring afternoon. Juliana wore a simple white dress without exaggeration. Henry, a light suit that Sophie had helped him choose. And in the midst of it all, Sophie, who held the rings with pride and responsibility, and who for the first time saw her father completely happy. When Henry and Juliana exchanged vows, they spoke not only of love, but of rebuilding. They spoke of second chances, of courage, of chosen family. And when they kissed, sealing the promise, Sophie signed in BSL something that made everyone present cry. She signed, "Now we are complete." Life wasn't perfect. It never is. But it became true. It became full. It became complete. Juliana still had difficult days. When the past returned in nightmares, she would wake up in the middle of the night, sweating cold, her heart pounding, thinking George was there. But Henry was always by her side, holding her, reminding her that she was safe, that she was home, that she was loved. Henry still blamed himself for the lost years with Sophie, for the wasted opportunities, for the signs he didn't learn in time. But Sophie, with the wisdom that only children have, always reminded him that what mattered was not the past, but the present they were building together. And Juliana taught them both that healing is not forgetting. It is learning to carry the scars without letting them define who you are. But they faced it together, because that's what families do. They face it together. And one ordinary night, years later, when Sophie was already a confident and happy teenager, when Juliana and Henry had built a solid life full of love, the three sat down at the table for dinner, as they did every night. The house had changed over the years. Photos on the walls showed the evolution of that family. Baby Sophie in Juliana's arms, child Sophie with Henry still distant, teenage Sophie laughing beside Juliana, the three together on trips, at parties, in simple but precious moments. Each photo told a story. Each photo was proof that love can heal, can transform, can rebuild. That night, Sophie had prepared dinner. It was a tradition that had started a few months ago. Once a week, she cooked for her parents. Sometimes it worked out, sometimes it didn't, but the effort was always worth it. And Sophie, now fluent in BSL and spoken English, thanks to continuous therapies, surgeries that restored part of her hearing, and the unwavering support of her parents, was becoming an incredible young woman. She had friends, she had dreams, she had a voice, and she used that voice to help other deaf children, visiting schools, teaching BSL, showing that limitations are just challenges waiting to be overcome. As they had dinner, they talked about Sophie's college plans, about Juliana's new project in the community centers, about Henry's promotion at work. Normal, everyday things, but which carried so much weight when one remembered where they had started. And then, in a moment of comfortable silence, Sophie made a sign. A simple sign, but one that contained everything. "Thank you," she said, looking at Juliana and Henry. "Thank you for being my family." Juliana felt her eyes fill with tears. They were good tears, of gratitude, of fulfillment. Henry held her hand under the table, squeezing tightly, and the three stayed there in that moment, both perfect and imperfect, knowing that they had built something rare, something true. Juliana thought about everything she had been through, the dark years with George, the desperate escape, the constant fear, and how in the midst of chaos she had found a job advertisement that would change everything. If someone had told her on that cold December day when she first entered that apartment that there she would find not just a job, but a family, she wouldn't have believed it. But life has these ironies. Sometimes what we are looking for is not what we truly need, and what we need appears when we least expect it. Henry looked at the two women who now shared his life and his heart. Sophie, the daughter he almost lost to silence and distance, but who now shone with her own light. And Juliana, the woman who had arrived broken but had rebuilt herself with admirable strength, and who in the process had rebuilt him too. He was no longer the empty man who lived on autopilot. He was a man who loved, who fought, who believed. And in that moment, everything was worth it. Every fear, every tear, every struggle, every sleepless night, every therapy, every step taken, even when it seemed impossible to continue. Because true love is not the one that comes easy. It is the one we build, brick by brick, gesture by gesture, day by day. It is the one that survives storms and comes out stronger on the other side. And that family, born of the improbable, the unexpected, the painful, was living proof that it is always worth believing. It is always worth fighting. It is always worth loving, even when it hurts, even when it scares, even when the path seems impossible. Because in the end, what remains are not the scars. It is the story of how we overcame them. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Henry, Juliana, and Sophie has deeply touched your hearts. If you were moved by this journey of overcoming, love, and new beginnings, please like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what moment stood out to you the most. Was it the first spark of hope when Juliana arrived, the courageous confrontation with the past, or the ending full of promises of a better future? Every day we bring intense stories like this, which reveal the deepest and truest side of the human soul. Stories that remind us that it's never too late to start over, that love can heal the deepest wounds, and that the courage to face our fears is what truly sets us free. We await you in the next episode with another story that will stir your emotions. Until then, take good care of those you love, and always believe in the power of new beginnings.